At this exact moment, anywhere across this globe, two individuals stand anxiously messaging one another, thoroughly overanalyzing punctuation. Somebody sits glaring at their screen, questioning whether placing a dot near the close of a text renders them appear aloof and hostile. Somebody else sits sharing a joke instead of voicing how they genuinely feel, since the image feels safer, less exposed, less horrifying. And deep down, two of them remain entirely fearful of rejection. Now, here's the inquiry that might hold you awake at night. Did cavemen do this also? Around 3.5 million years prior, our forebears weren't even entirely human yet. We mean Australopithecus, small-brained, bipedal, likely not securing any philosophy prizes anytime soon. Standing upright, sure. Penning verses about it, definitely not. Yet here's something captivating that even most science instructors skip past. Even during that early phase, researchers have discovered proof of a drastic change regarding societal conduct, a shift that would ultimately lead, following millions of years of trial and error alongside failed relationships, towards everything we currently understand as love. Before bipedalism fully settled in, our primate forebears seemed much like gorillas. Giant males, much tinier females. One dominant silverback dictating access to mates via sheer bodily intimidation. This was essentially ancient toxic masculinity, though with extra chest thumping and fewer social media posts regarding it. Yet something shifted once we stood upright. As our forebears transitioned into full bipedalism, the size variance between males and females, what researchers label sexual dimorphism, began shrinking. Those males weren't growing grotesquely huge anymore relative to females. And that's truly a huge deal which almost nobody discusses aloud. Because inside the animal kingdom, the degree of size variance between males and females remains one of the clearest indicators regarding what type of mating system a species utilizes. Massive size variance. That's a harem-based structure. Single male, multiple females, tons of violence, nearer in scale, which typically signifies pair bonding, enduring connections, teamwork, faithfulness, at least in principle. In simpler terms, as our forebears began walking upright, the physiological groundwork for something resembling romance started to develop. Not instantly, not perfectly, yet it commenced. And this remains crazy to ponder over. The instant your forebear stood up on 2 feet, 3.5 million years prior, they were without realizing it making the initial bodily leap towards ultimately adoring somebody. One of the highly crucial and undervalued findings in the whole tale of prehistoric romance is something termed mate provisioning. It sounds like a dull financial phrase. It is in truth one of the most primal love languages we've ever pinpointed. Here's what occurred. Around 1.8 million years ago, alongside the rise of Homo erectus, something novel emerged in the archaeological logs. Proof of methodical meal sharing, and not merely collective splitting with the entire band. Signs of males heading out to hunt or scavenge, and carrying particular meals back to particular females and their young. Not everybody. Distinct individuals. From an evolutionary biology perspective, this conduct only makes rational sense under one parameter. The male needs to hold some level of certainty that the kids he's nourishing are his own. Otherwise, from a purely selfish genetic viewpoint, why care? Why expend your stamina and take those risks for someone else's descendants? Which implies pair bonding, a prolonged, favored, exclusivish connection between two distinct individuals. An agreement, however implied, however silent, however muttered, that you are mine and I am yours. Bravo! You merely observe the prehistoric creation of fetching somebody supper. Ponder over that for a moment. This isn't symbolic. This isn't creative liberty. The true factual genesis of the romantic action of supplying for your mate, venturing out into a perilous world, and arriving back with something uniquely for them, remains 1.88 million years old. It precedes speech. It precedes fire mastery. It precedes anything we normally link with human society. And in an environment where you could get attacked by a hyena on the trek home, or tumble into a river, or stumble into a brawl with a hostile clan, opting to expend your finite stamina and supplies solely on one individual remains truly deeply, profoundly romantic. It merely happens to also feature a deceased antelope, yet we won't judge. Next, let's dive into the material that truly blew my mind when I initially read about it. Since meals aren't the singular method early mankind displayed romantic inclination, let's discuss physical ornamentation. Roughly 100,000 years passed, and there's some proof pushing this timeline even further. People began doing something that had sincerely never occurred prior in the history of life on Earth. They began adorning themselves. We're discussing punctured shells worn like necklaces discovered at locations within North Africa. Ochre, a crimson and yellow mineral dye smeared onto flesh in designs. Sculpted ivory beads, plumes integrated into garments or hats, jewelry. Fundamentally personal adornment, artistic self-expression. And the query evolutionary scientists have spent decades struggling with remains why. Why should a living being who has to stress about sourcing sufficient nutrition to live, evading apex hunters, preserving social ties with their clan, and not perishing from infections via a minor scrape? Why would that individual expend hours and effort, making themselves appear attractive? The primary response remains sexual selection. And it was Charles Darwin himself who initially voiced this concept that numerous traits in creatures develop not since they aid survival, but since they help lure partners. The peacock's plumage represents the classic instance, entirely worthless for survival. Indeed makes one more conspicuous to attackers, yet it functions amazingly nicely towards attracting female birds. Human decoration operates the exact way. You adorn yourself to project, I remain inventive. I possess the mental capacity to envision what doesn't currently exist and render it real. I hold the manual talent to fashion something gorgeous. I secure ample supplies so I can afford to waste time on beauty. I remain, in brief, a top-tier mate. Seem recognizable? It must, because we continually do this. We doll up for outings, we get our haircuts styled, we meticulously select which pictures to upload onto our profiles. The particular adornments have shifted. Shells presently equal sparkling diamonds. Ochre now equals foundation. Yet the core urge fueling this conduct remains identical. Absolutely flawlessly identical. Yet here's the fact that truly stopped me dead when I initially stumbled upon it. Whenever researchers discover beads crafted out of identical unique shells at locations standing hundreds of miles apart, varying tribes, separate territories, distinct ecological biomes, it implies that such items were getting bartered, handed through webs of human connection spanning immense geographic spans, which signifies those items held worth, societal, symbolic, relational worth, which indicates somebody 100,000 years past obtained a present. An item which had journeyed far, an artifact that somebody picked expressly to gift them. The globe's initial, I spotted this and thought regarding you. I sincerely cannot ponder upon that for too long, without sensing something. Let's grab a second to deconstruct one of the highly enduring fallacies regarding prehistoric courtship. The notion that early hominid pairing was essentially simply largest, toughest guy triumphs. Everybody else copes with it. That is the trope you spot in awful action films, sloppy documentaries, plus every chat with anybody who weaponizes evolutionary science to excuse acting awful. And although masculine rivalry undeniably occurred, we possess the fractured skeletons to demonstrate it. The alpha male claims everything paradigm remains a fiercely oversimplified and mostly incorrect depiction of how hominid pair bonding truly developed. Here's the primary justification why. People remain what scientists dub collaborative breeders. Rearing an infant human remains from a physiological perspective nearly laughably demanding and resource-heavy. A mortal newborn is birthed within a phase of nearly absolute powerlessness, which might feel humiliating under any alternate mammalian benchmarks. A newborn fawn can stroll within hours. An infant chimpanzee sits physically gripping onto its mom within days. A human infant requires somebody to perform essentially everything for them for years. And even following that, such dependency persists across an astounding duration of time. That produces an evolutionary dynamic wherein single parents attempting to rear kids independently face considerably poorer results than two guardians collaborating. The arithmetic remains harsh. Dual guardian investment isn't merely pleasant to possess. It drastically boosts juvenile survival odds. And this alters absolutely everything regarding what you're picking for in partners. Provided you're a woman inside this setting, you don't simply desire the guy boasting the largest biceps. You seek the partner who might remain, who might fetch meals homeward, who might assist carrying loads whilst you're expecting, who will defend, not merely fiercely, but reliably across decades, not solely during the cinematic climax of a brawl. You're not solely choosing for brawn. You're choosing for dependability, for faithfulness, for what we could fairly dub sheer dedication. And assuming you're a guy, the equation shifts, additionally. You're not merely attempting to breed alongside as numerous women as feasible. You're committing into an alliance, a long-term collaborative project. You crave somebody with whom you might construct something lasting. That remains the biological genesis behind romance's profound depths. Not solely desire, not simply appeal, but bonding. The distinct borderline illogical yearning to accompany this exact single individual. Not merely any workable alternative. The sensation that one particular mortal has grown unexpendable within a manner that breaks basic reason. Romance as a survival tactic. One of the highly concurrently pessimistic and gorgeous concepts in all of biology. All right, yet here is the query I realize has been brewing within your brain this whole while. Certainly, the habits were present, the pair bonding, the supplying, the decoration. Yet did primal mortals genuinely experience anything? Or remained it entirely just subconscious biological coding? Existed there genuine feelings, real yearning, true sorrow? Here is where matters become both captivating and frankly a tiny bit crushing. We couldn't stick an ancient human into an MRI scanner. We couldn't prompt a Homo erectus to articulate what it feels like to miss someone. But we possess hints, and some among them remain exceptional. Initially, the neurological proof. By roughly 300,000 years prior, Homo sapiens possessed essentially the exact neurological framework we carry today. The limbic system, the mind's emotional hub responsible for attachment, dread, pleasure, sorrow, yearning, sat completely formed and entirely functional. The neurochemical mechanisms that create what we feel as love. Dopamine inundating the reward pathways whenever we notice someone we're drawn to. Oxytocin forging the bond regarding profound attachment. Vasopressin pushing the defensive possessiveness we feel toward partners. All of this sat entirely in place. The hardware operated, which implies the software almost undoubtedly ran upon it. The emotions were present. Yet then there's the Shanidar cave proof. And this particular hits differently. During the 1950s, researchers unearthing Shanidar Cave within what is currently Iraq uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal male. And not simply any Neanderthal, one who had evidently survived alongside severe paralyzing handicaps. A shriveled, apparently useless right arm, which had gotten damaged or disfigured early during youth. Mended fractures indicating massive trauma. Possible sight loss across one eye. The sort of wounds which within any pure survival of the fittest landscape would have yielded in death long before. But he hadn't perished young. The skeletal proof indicated he had survived for decades following such traumas. Decades upon decades of survival inside one of the cruelest landscapes imaginable. As a man who could not have hunted, who could not have foraged successfully, who could not have provided the bodily exertion that prehistoric existence required, he survived because alternative individuals kept him going, opted to nourish him, opted to defend him, opted to expend their finite supplies, keeping somebody breathing who could not quickly repay. That is not survival drive. That is not rational resource management. That is compassion for the sake of compassion. That is devotion that endures beyond utility. That remains at its heart love, within the widest, truest meaning of the concept. And Neanderthals, let's not overlook, shared roughly 99.7% of their genetics alongside us. They intermingled alongside Homo sapiens. Provided you're of non-African heritage, you are bearing Neanderthal genetics within your genome right today. Those weren't foreign monsters. They remained kin, close kin. If they might care like that, and the proof incredibly heavily indicates they did, then the sentimental existence of early Homo sapiens remained almost undeniably richer, deeper, and more familiar to us than we've usually given it respect for. Let's discuss about envy, because no discussion surrounding romance remains complete without addressing its shadow. Jealousy is not pretty. Nobody names it as their finest attribute, yet it is primal and grasping. Why it functions actually explains a lot regarding how prehistoric romance functioned. The evolutionary reasoning is not complex. Provided you have established a pair bond alongside someone, and you stand dedicating massive time and resources toward raising offspring alongside them, offspring who bear your genetic code, then any hazard to that connection constitutes a direct hazard toward your evolutionary tomorrow. The mind perceives it like an emergency. Hormones surge, focus tightens, Conduct becomes defensive, occasionally violently so. Cross-cultural reviews of modern hunter-gatherer groups, which offer our most accurate lens into prehistoric societal behaviors, constantly demonstrate that a massive percentage of masculine conflict is linked to mate rivalry and suspected betrayal. This isn't a modern illness. This is primal programming. Yet here's the reverse side of that token, because it counts. The identical programming which fuels jealousy likewise fuels fidelity. The identical attachment mechanism, which renders you sensitive toward hazards, renders you completely dedicated toward your mate. Vasopressin, one of the primary neurochemicals regarding pair bonding, fuels not merely possessiveness, but devotion, defense, the urge to preserve the connection, not via domination, but via presence and dedication. Therefore, whenever you feel envious, genuinely, senselessly, awkwardly envious, you stand executing a script that remains approximately 200,000 years ancient. You stand not defective. You remain simply primal, which remains either reassuring or profoundly disturbing, hinging upon your viewpoint. And frankly, it could remain both at the exact moment. Let me educate you regarding music, since this could remain my absolute favorite section of the entire tale. The earliest verified musical artifacts ever uncovered remain flutes carved out of vulture bone, alongside mammoth ivory unearthed inside caverns throughout southwestern Germany, dated to roughly 40,000 years past. They represent truly gorgeous artifacts, meticulously sculpted, purposely intended to create precise tones. But 40,000 years is almost undoubtedly not when music started. It's merely when the tools grew sturdy enough to last. Rhythm instruments crafted from timber, vocals, chest thumping, bone frameworks which leave zero residue. Melodies crafted entirely via the biological form and fragile materials leaves nothing beneath the dirt for humans to uncover. The authentic genesis of sound remains almost undoubtedly much, much older. And sound matters vastly throughout the tale of romance, since it remains the ubiquitous emotional tool of societal interaction. Every specific human society across Earth, without fail, utilizes music during wooing, vocalizing to lure a mate, grooving together, which represents coordinated action and a potent sign of physical and social alignment. Utilizing tune and beat to convey sentimental moods that vocabulary either cannot touch or hasn't survived long enough to manage. Darwin himself theorized that song originated fundamentally as a tool for sexual selection, that our forebears cultivated musical talent for the exact motivation. Peacocks cultivated flashy feathers, to lure, to dazzle, to convey. I possess something worth picking. What this denotes in realistic terms remains incredible. 40,000 years passed, and likely way prior that, somebody sat serenading somebody else, resting near a flame inside a cavern within Ice Age Europe, blowing a bone flute, staring at somebody past the embers, utilizing noise to bridge the insurmountable void separating two anxious, optimistic, frightened mortal souls, utilizing sound to convey, I sense something. I crafted this for you. Can you sense it too? Let's grab a second to ponder the exclusivity inquiry, since it constantly arises, and the response is truly fascinating. The proof points toward what evolutionary researchers label socially monogamous, alongside some occasional polygyny, which represents scientific jargon for humans mostly matched up one-on-one. Such couples remain socially acknowledged and culturally supported, yet it wasn't strictly ubiquitous, and the boundaries remained constantly a tiny bit chaotic. The subtle size variance separating mortal men and women implies our reproductive setup rests somewhere betwixt the total polygyny of apes and the nearly flawless exclusivity of gibbons. We're physically within the center. Socially, however, that's where society and sentiment handle the heavy lifting that sheer biology leaves unfinished. What we gather via anthropological studies of hunter-gatherer societies across the globe represents that whilst several among them allow polygyny as a conceptual choice, the overwhelming majority of authentic connections in reality stand pair bonds. Most humans remain inside a dedicated one-on-one relationship most of the while. Such connections remain acknowledged by the tribe, frequently celebrated and shielded via societal rules. Primal romance wasn't flawless. It wasn't consistently loyal. The proof regarding strife and envy and bloodshed proves obvious that it remained chaotic and painful and flawed in all the manners that term entails. Yet the pair bond, two individuals picking each other, constructing something jointly, rearing kids jointly, defending one another, remained the primary societal block, the bedrock of everything erected upon top of it. Here's where it entirely merges together. Here's the core I genuinely need you to depart bearing. Romance is not a modern creation. It is not a consequence of civilization or reading or free hours or romantic prose. It is not something mankind cultivated after we secured food stability and ample spare hours to ponder upon our emotions. It sat there initially. It sat there before towns, before farming, before vocabulary, before fire mastery. It sat there during the absolute dawn of what it signifies to become human. And the case might be argued incredibly earnestly, and alongside massive scientific support, that it remains practically one of the elements that rendered us human. Pair bonding sparked the evolution of vocabulary, since you must converse alongside a mate in manners that grunting cannot entirely convey. It sparked the evolution of song and creativity, since you demand novel methods for communication and allure. It sparked the growth of teamwork and society, since compassion for a mate stretches toward compassion for offspring, and compassion for offspring stretches toward compassion for their tribe. And suddenly, you're forging a civilization. Romance didn't chase human society. Human society chased romance. That Homo sapiens resting inside East Africa 100,000 years past, staring at somebody past the embers, sensing something whilst lacking the vocabulary regarding it yet. Something cozy and baffling and horrifying and compelling and completely illogical. They sat sensing precisely what you have sensed. What you shall sense anew. What every single human being who has ever existed inside every era and every location has sensed. The shell pendant they crafted, the meal they hauled homeward, the tune they sang towards the night, the individual they picked to remain beside, differing specifics, exact emotion. Therefore, the subsequent instance you're glaring into your screen frozen by the dilemma of whether to type a dot or not. Or you sense that horrifying floating freefall of adoring about somebody harder than you seem comfortable accepting. Simply realize this. You remain performing something primal, something so ancient it lacks zero dawn. We might track something so elemental towards the mortal journey that it spans backward beyond vocabulary, beyond instruments, beyond everything that divides us from the beasts we originated alongside. Every specific soul among your forebears, stretching backward longer than thought might grasp, sensed whatever you stand sensing. They managed it poorly, chaotically, occasionally brutally, frequently gorgeously, and somehow, miraculously, defying all odds, past ice epochs and famines and beasts and hostile clans, everyone among them resolved it simply sufficiently to continue moving, which explains why you're present, which remains whenever you ponder regarding it, the highly incredible concept I've known,